Michelle?
Daniel,
OG
OG
Rose?
Rose, and we're in the garage, and there are stuffed animals. The kids found
A beanbag.
a beanbag full of stuffed animals. You have these things where you can make a beanbag chair, filling it with stuffed animals, so it's like storage and, you know,
A beanbag?
beanbag. So it's pretty cool. But Michelle, what are you thinking about?
Well, thank you for asking, Daniel. Um, and thank you all for being here. I have been thinking about how do you change,
Yeah. Mm,
pretty much. I mean, I've been wrestling with that because it's it feels easy to identify certain things in your life or patterns you have that are not ideal.
mm.
Now you have to get into how do you assess that they're not ideal? Well, that's where you need philosophy too, right? You have to start to think, well, what does that mean that it's not ideal? Is it just not what other people want me to be doing, or is it actually not functional, or what's going on there? Anyways, once you though determine or decide, it might be a sort of an absolute choice thing to say,
Yeah.
okay, this is actually not ideal. Um, how do you actually go from the identification or the explanation to the addressing? Like, with belonging again, we have explain and address. So I'm thinking about, obviously there are, and I don't know if it's just that the brain wants to keep entertaining the question as an avoidance
Yeah.
strategy.
Sure.
So basically, if you can just always say, "Well, I don't know. How do you do that?" Then you can just say, I just know what's the problem, but I don't know how to change it." But really, you do, but you're just afraid to do it,
Mm-hmm.
or you're just so ingrained that it just feels very uncomfortable to do it.
Mm.
And I think that's probably a big part of it. But I do think that there's a lot of identification. Like I'll say this too. I think I saw I if you see somebody in their later years identify something they wish they'd done differently, but all they can say is don't do what I did, basically.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
But it doesn't really answer the question of like, how would you do it differently?
Right.
Which I know it seems maybe so obvious.
Right. Right.
Maybe it does seem obvious, like, well, obviously it just means do it differently than they did it, right? Or do the opposite of the way they did it. But it speaks to me of the need for doing intentional work, of allowing your unconscious to come forth, maybe through journaling, prayer, different types of praxis that allow you to do a type of leap of faith work
Mm.
where you trust that through that work you will come to an understanding of what you may need to do, or you at least allow yourself to unpack that. So basically, if you can just keep circling, you know how we do basically we're circling a topic in our conversations, right? And Guy does a lot of great stuff with
Yeah.
circling too. um, do that with yourself and the issue that you're finding in yourself.
Mm.
So it's like, okay, what is this thing? What is it that I feel like I should be doing this better, but I'm not. What is that thing, first of all? And then start to think about why could that be? What's so just basically giving yourself the permission to do that work, because it kind of seems like, well, what would that do? Or maybe that's not relevant, or maybe that's taking away from my other obligations that I know I need to do, right? But this is the kind of non-rational work
Mm-hmm.
that I think is important in the cultivation of self, and may help one address the thing that they have identified
Mm.
as, again, not ideal. So I guess I've just been thinking about that, Daniel,
Mm.
because, and look, we're human, so as much inner work or whatever you want to say as we do, we're still going to make mistakes. We're still going to do things, especially when we're at our lowest energy. We're going to revert to some
Mhm.
of our easiest
Happens.
habits, right? Because they're easier to reach. So if you don't have a lot of energy, you just go for the
Right.
low hanging fruit, right? Or whatever is easiest in reach. So that's a big part of it too, right? Where your energy is going to impact almost your capacity to change.
Yeah.
But I just wanted to think through that.
Mm.
And I do think that's something that I've been wondering about, is if you could just identify the little thoughts in your head. Because, the slips of the lip, that's big in psychoanalysis and
Yeah.
everything,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Where maybe that's telling you something about yourself. So if you're reading something and you have a reaction or whatever it is, actually take an opportunity to use that as a leverage point.
Mm.
So whatever that reaction is, start to think about, why did I react so
Yeah.
much
Yeah.
like,
Yeah.
or why did I have that little thought of like, oh, I could never do something like that. Why was that such a gut certainty that you have about X, Y, and Z? And what exactly is that debilitation you're doing to yourself in that language?
Mm.
Because I do think it's related a lot to language too. Like language shapes our reality. So um that's what I've been thinking about amongst other things. But I thought I'd throw it your way because We talked a little bit about it at the end of articulation, the conversation there, where, for example, your orientation to how you view your work. Is it the work's problem or is it
Yeah.
your problem
Yeah,
in
yeah.
the work?
Yep.
Probably you. Now, yes, could you and should you maybe change your job? Maybe you should. However, first start with what you can do. Maybe you can't change your job, so maybe you should start with what you can do, which is how do you orient yourself toward it.
Mm.
And and I think that's also fun. I'm sorry, I'm going on and on.
No,
Let me
no.
say, just let me stay there for just one more second. That's also a tricky point too. And I think there's a lot of nuance, and I would say can be confusion because it's like, well, if the job's not, if not feeling good toward the job, some people will just say automatically, don't do that job, which there might be validity to that. Or maybe it means you just need to work on, again, this kind of inner work, like I was saying, letting yourself circle some questions and circle some reactions and circle some things in yourself that maybe would lead you to a type of transformation, right? Articulation to transformation that could lead you to be different in your orientation toward that job. I do feel like if I had to say, like show my cards, probably that's better to do that work first because at least you can maybe see if something happens from that. Now, if you really do that work and you're still hitting that, like, wow, this is just not the way, like, then maybe you do need to change your job.
Mhm.
But I guess I just want to say that it's so easy to, we talked about victimhood a little bit last time. It's so easy to fall into that place of just, it's their problem, it's a job's problem, it's my husband's problem, it's this person's problem. And yet, like, the way that you are in your reality is you always have the capacity to re-language it and re-envision what it is and re-experience it and
Right.
even physically change your sensations. And that's what I've been thinking a lot about too,
Yep.
is like physically feeling different because of the
Mhm.
way you think about things and the way that you open yourself up to potentiality and also choice, the
Yep.
choice, the choosing you want to do. So that's a lot there, Daniel. But I do. I think I feel like what I'm landing on in all of that is kind of going back to the excuse it is to keep saying I don't know what to do because a lot of times you probably do. It just again feels so outside of your norm,
Right.
and you almost feel like it's a I couldn't be somebody who does that kind of thing,
Mhm.
or I couldn't even be somebody who takes the time to do the work
Mhm.
on these questions that I should maybe orbit because, well, then how is everything else going to get done? But that's a big ego thing, right?
Mhm.
Because then you're kind of making yourself so self important that you're actually not doing, you almost lose yourself in the self importance. It's a strange irony. But, anyways, I'll throw it back your way. That's a lot
Yeah,
there. But
no,
thank you
I
for
mean
letting me
it's
share.
a very interesting question on how do you change? Because there's a bunch of things. So first, how do you know you should change?
Mhm.
Like how
Yep.
do you
Yep.
know you're right to think you need to change?
Mhm.
What does it mean to change?
Yes.
Third, there's something odd because if you know you need to change and it would be good to change, then almost by definition you would, right?
Yeah.
It's kind of like Augustine saying or suggesting there's no such thing as an evil intention. Now, there
No.
are, of course, intentions with evil outcome. It's kind of impossible to intend the evil because if you think you should do it, then it must be good to do,
Right.
right? So, likewise, if you think that a change is something you should do, there's something strange um, to suggest you're not doing it, because then mustn't that mean you don't really think you need to change,
Mhm.
or what's going on?
Yeah. Yeah.
It's kind of like the Finnegan great question of how is self-deception
But again,
possible? Yeah.
mm,
He was a philosopher who had a book on self-deception. He's kind of
interesting.
asking, how is self-deception possible?
Mm,
Because if you know you're deceived, then you're not self-deceived, right?
yeah.
So there's some sort of
Yep. Yep. Yep.
odd, strange loop, to use that Holstat term, that is at play here. So there's also a few levels. Yeah, are we talking about you want to change in the sense of I get up too late, I'm
Hmm.
wasting my day, I'm
Yep. Exactly.
overweight?
Yep. Yep.
Okay, because I think the problem is that question, like, how do you change? There's probably like that one question is being used in a bunch of different
Yeah.
contexts that mean different
Yeah.
things.
Yeah.
Because if I say I'm overweight, I feel like I'm getting up late and I'm not doing anything with my life.
Okay.
Okay, well, then in a sense, this is, well, set your alarm for 5, go
Yeah.
run, change your diet. There's a way in which that's very straightforward.
Yeah.
And maybe that's just in the realm of willpower. right?
Mhm.
Now, of course, Seth and I talked about the problem with trying to solve all your problems with willpower because that just leads to entropy and burnout and whatever. You
Right.
have to change your habits, right? So you need to
Yeah.
create an environment, an entire way
Yeah.
of life that
Yeah.
facilitates getting up at 5 in the morning and stuff like that. So
Yeah.
that's one thing. But let me throw it to you.
Well, just really quick, I did a little rambly recording that I don't know that I'll ever release, but I had this reflection because I'm reading this book by Yolanda Norris Clark, and she was talking about joy and how much joy is important in what you do. Like it doesn't mean that it won't be hard sometimes, and it doesn't mean that it won't be challenge you, but you should ultimately like joy is going to be the greatest the greatest orientation of how that will embetter your life and like have a positive feedback
Yeah,
loop.
sure.
And it's so difficult because I think we've conflated suffering with love in Christianity.
Yes, we have. Yeah.
So when we hear that, we just think that sounds weak.
Yeah, sure.
Yes, but then you think about the scripture where it says the joy of the Lord will be my strength.
Yes.
And it's like, oh, that her talking about this because she was talking about this in terms of habits, right?
Yes.
She's like, start getting up when the sun gets up, go to bed when the sun goes down, like in the sense of just orient yourself in your life toward movement, toward,
Yeah.
actually connecting with
Mm-hmm.
the earth and being in your actual ecology, et cetera, et cetera. Like this will make you feel better kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
And then she was also saying though, like, don't get so hung up on what particular type of thing and like do it because there's a levity and a joy to it
Mm.
because that's actually going to be the best medicine. Like that's going to be the best remedy for your life. So it kind of relates to when we talked about recovering overthinker, David saying like willpower needs to tap into creativity. We talked
Yeah.
about that too on one of our episodes.
Yes.
So it's like where you think about creativity, enjoyment as a form of enhancing your willpower. So yes,
Yes.
this woman I'm talking about who wrote this book, like she waitlist every day, has had 11 natural, childbirth children. Like she's not afraid of facing the uncomfortable things. It's just that joy is going to be your strength. And if you can really understand that and not see it as a weakness or not see it as pure hedonism or as childishness, then you can actually tap into a greater capacity, I think.
Yeah, I mean, Seth and I, we talked on willpower as emergency power that leads to breakdown if it doesn't lead to a breakthrough into Sabbath.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And you see, basically, we're confused. We think the only power is willpower,
Right.
when really willpower is emergency power, or something that's supposed to be a really strong burst power
Hmm.
to get you through something hard. But on the other side of that hardness has to be some kind of Sabbath rest, some sort of resting in, which is the joy of the Lord. Um, we don't really believe in that.
Hmm.
And furthermore, because willpower gives you like quick results and very quick, we tend to over index that as the only kind of power. It's similar to how we've said we only believe in biology, the biological energy. We've lost track of the mystery
Yeah.
energy. So it
Yeah.
goes
Yep.
with
Exactly.
Sabbath power, if you will, versus willpower. So we're very confused on this. And furthermore, an ethic gets kind of created around willpower and being tired and being exhausted, and that means
Yeah.
you're moral.
And
And there's
suffering and
yeah,
suffering
and
and it being hard,
yes, and
you
there's a
know.
way in which if we take obviously Nietzsche by beyond good and evil meant something different, but there's a way in which that is a good and evil we need to get beyond because in
Absolutely.
fact it
Absolutely.
oddly in the name of being productive, I think it makes us less productive because
1000%.
joy and intrinsic motivation actually make a more productive people,
Yeah.
right? So
And
there's this kind of ethic of suffering
exactly.
that is problematic. But then on the flip side, if you're not able to muster willpower, then
Yes.
you may actually not be able to break through into Sabbath rest. So there is something to
Exactly.
be said about the importance of willpower. But the point is that willpower basically should be the exception, not the rule. It's a very,
Hmm.
very important exception.
Yeah.
If you don't have it when you need it, it can be a big, big issue. But if you make it the norm, you get breakdown.
Yeah.
So
Exactly.
it should be kind of bursting. It should be a
Yeah.
burst power, if you will.
That's good.
But
One, and you were saying like the different change. We kind of talk about changing your life, and we use it for so many different contexts, like
yes.
for your habits versus like some psychological thing that you're not really you keep on kind of hitting a wall with. Like so, we use it in a very vague way, right?
Well, yeah, absolutely, because I think the first thing, because I think there are just it would seem as if the question can be asking many things, and if we get confused, then what may address one of the changes, one may use that same kind of address on another where it doesn't work and
Mm,
actually makes things worse. So
yeah.
it's really important, I think, to identify different kinds of changes. So there's this one change that is just I don't feel energetic, I don't feel alive,
Yeah.
and I need to get out of that. And it's like, okay, well, make your bed. Very much in a Peterson way. He changed many people's lives for the better. I mean, and that's one form of changing your life. Now, what needs to be noted in this example, the alternative is not something that people feel is noble, admirable, or good. So, for example, if you're like, I get up too late, you don't think it's good to get up late.
And
You
you also
see,
feel don't feel good
you
getting
don't.
up
You
late.
also don't feel good.
I mean,
So,
there could be a difference there, but I'm
well,
saying
the point is that you're not really going to debate the other side or see the benefits of the other side are not there. It really is more on the side of I need to do this and I'm just not. And
exactly.
why am I not? I often maybe I'm just too busy or not paying attention or stress. I don't know why I'm not, right? Or
Well, that's where the circling that question could be helpful, right?
yeah,
Literally get a pen and paper out,
yeah,
like just start writing, like why might I not be
yeah. I
like
mean, a lot of
I
time.
feel overwhelmed, whatever. I think like I have to take care of everything, whatever it is,
Yeah, there can be many reasons for this.
yeah,
It can be that you did everything you were supposed to do and the job market changed, or the housing projects changed, or your degree didn't get a job, or you didn't get a degree, or maybe you're quite successful, but you don't feel good. You don't feel
yeah,
energetic, right? So there's this, and I think honestly, I don't want to say 90% of the time, but a very large amount of the time when people are talking about how to change your life, how to improve your life, a lot of the self-help stuff, which has a role, it's really talking about that kind of change. That change where there's something you want to do, you don't like how you feel. And this is really important. You don't like how you feel
yeah,
and you want to feel better.
yeah,
Um this this though can set you up for trouble if you thus identify feeling better with making the right change or doing the right thing.
mm-hmm.
Because another way that can make you feel good is avoiding responsibility or
Exactly.
abandoning your obligations or people can feel better because they,
Start drinking alcohol.
start
I don't
drinking
know. Yeah,
alcohol or they abandon their family or abandon their job and they do something
like
rash in
I
midlife.
feel like myself again.
Yeah, and you feel great. You
Yeah,
have a dopamine rush of feeling free from determination.
yeah,
We talk all the time about free from determination,
hmm
freedom from versus freedom in.
yeah,
And the problem is freedom from does feel good. Freedom from responsibility, which I would actually argue is free, like responsibility and freedom go together.
yeah,
Unfortunately, freedom from freedom feels good. And if you're associating feeling good with making the right change,
hmm
because in the first example, that you're feeling bad and you want to feel good, but you apply that to the more existential changes,
right.
you actually could make the wrong choice. Uh,
Well, that's interesting. I think that's helpful because if you think about the fact that your body does need to feel good in the sense of it having energy to do anything else.
yes.
So it's not to think it's irrelevant to consider how do you
No, but
phenomenologically
let me
feel,
add quickly
but
that
then on the existential level, you should
go
not
with how you
assume
feel. But here's the
you should
problem
not assume
is
that to making the choice to feel good is necessarily going to be the one of like beauty, truth, goodness,
correct, but what
wisdom.
becomes very tricky is often to get the energy to do the existential change, you had to do the change to feel good energetically, which then you can overfit that methodology on the existential
Yeah.
because it worked before. And so you still keep using that mental model when you start going up the existential, and now you're overfitting. So I think you
Mm,
have to have a switch on kind of the model that you're using relative to what, right?
mm.
And I think that starts getting at where if you don't identify that there are actually different kinds of changes, like you could
Yeah.
say there's I want to say an energetic change,
Yeah.
but
Yeah.
then there's a existential change. Then there's a change for beauty, many things. But let me give it to you.
Well, no, this is good. I do think there's also still a question mark for me because, like for example, when I get hungry, I literally can start feeling existential.
They all
So it's
overlap, but
just
that's
yeah,
why it
they
becomes
overlap.
difficult is you've got to have
Yeah,
real live discernment
yeah.
on what do you need to change right now? Like,
Well, and
because there's a
yeah,
way in which if you're not feeling right, what do I need to change right now?
yes.
But then you can't assume that if you feel right, that means you shouldn't change anything.
Hmm.
That's the tricky thing is
Yeah,
you've got to really be paying attention to what kind of change are we talking here? Are we talking
yeah,
about the change needed for you to be able to discern existential change? Ergo, you need to eat food and feel better because if you don't change your metabolism or change how you feel right now, you're not going to be in a position to make good existential or philosophical discernments. But once you've made that, you kind of, in a way, have to kind of throw out the assumption that feeling good means you're doing the right thing. Because you might have to do something that feels terrible to get to the other side where the Sabbath rest is found and joy is found. Because often joy is found on the other side of doing something hard, like having courage or facing fear
Yeah.
or doing something difficult. So there's this live kind of discernment and flexibility that is needed. That you've really got to be paying attention, I think.
Mhm. Yeah, no, that's good. That's good. And I guess I'm just thinking about the fact that the oh right, I guess I was just thinking on the physical level though. Maybe it really does matter to think about it in terms of energetics. I don't know. I think that I mean, I think that can be helpful. I think that can be helpful in
Sure.
the sense of like, okay, what is the energy flow within that? Um, however, this is what I was going to say. However, I was contemplating this question of why is it that somebody can actually feel good in a dynamic that is unhealthy?
Yeah, but
I mean, you see this
that's
all
what
the
we're getting
time,
at.
right?
That's what we're getting at.
And then you're like, wait, this is about me, like, because the thing is, it's so the other day I had this like realization that because again, it's so tempting to just say, well, those people take care of me. See, it shows the infantilization of it all. But they take care of me this way, and I don't get, I feel whatever, more nourished, whatever it is, with them. Uh, and so then that means that, you know, um, that should be a model for how to think about care.
Yeah,
Okay. At the same time, that same model presents many, many existential
that's what we're getting.
psychological
Yes,
issues
yes, yes.
that are incredibly energy draining.
Yep,
That's
yep,
just that
yep.
in the quotidian of life of making meals and doing this and that, there is all of the kind of typical what you knew to be nourishment and what you
Mhm,
experienced to be
mhm.
nourishing, especially as a child. So then you're thinking to yourself, like, I'm just saying that I'm trying to paint an example of like the dissonance that can occur because I think people do that. I mean, you hear about people in abusive relationships, unfortunately, and how why is it so hard to for
Yeah,
them to leave? Well, because that they've known that to be
yeah, the norm.
the norm and also what they feel to be love and what they
Yes,
feel. And so
yes,
it's a massive, massive shattering of
yes.
so much of what you know to be true. It
Well,
and it's not to dismiss, you have to kind of honor the fact that whatever that those conditions are, the people were probably just doing what they thought was best. However, there are certain things that are not being addressed in in those conditions. And so you're trying to elevate to creating other conditions that can create a type of care that does actually feed you on a biological habit level, but also on an existential level.
yeah,
And you're going to have to do it. Like, nobody's going to, you can't put it on everybody else around you that's not being taken. It's like and it just, the reason why you have to face that it's you is because this is where it goes back to now you get to have the opportunity to make the changes that you need to. Um, you can still keep going back to, well, I don't know what that means. Maybe you don't. But if you don't, then do your best to nourish your physical body the best you can, and then give yourself some energy and capacity to think about, okay, what are just the little scraps I can remember of things that I felt I needed to do that I'm not doing, that I'm not facing, that I'm afraid to face or do, and try to just start doing those little scraps because I do believe those will help gain some momentum and
yes.
having clarity, almost a spiritual clarity for what you do need to do and continue doing to be
Yeah,
not just feeling good, but to becoming,
human,
yeah, becoming
fully
more
human.
fully human. Yeah. So I
Well,
hope that makes sense. It's
yes,
just a
yes,
really, it's hard though, because the easy thing for humans is just to say, well, that condition is what's care. And
yes,
everybody else in my life now should just do what everybody
yes,
else in my
yes,
life then
yes,
did. And they should just do that. And I'm just going to stay here like this
yes.
infantilized victim,
Because that was your habit. That's what you were habituated into, the norm, the quote unquote given.
Right.
But that's the problem. These things lead to violence and overfitting or kind of ethical codes that break down the social.
Well, and you have to do this weird thing where you have to acknowledge that that is care and love, and it's also not perhaps meeting the needs of full humanness on the existential, psychological, philosophical level, which we still have those needs too as humans,
Yes,
because we're,
but those
language beings,
but
if
there's
you
a few
will.
things. I mean, those needs can be very difficult to face, and so something that saves you from facing them can feel good, right? And if you
Yeah.
don't have philosophy, why would you ever think that not facing those, that not facing those would be bad? right? Because the experience of them is like the void and
Mhm.
incompleteness and all that other jazz. So then if you don't have philosophy, why would
Exact
you even
hmm,
think that thought,
hmm,
right? So you get kind of
mhm.
enclosed.
Yeah,
Um, there's a few things.
and then you feel like maybe it would've been better off never to have that veil torn in a
Yeah, we
sense,
should have
right?
never left Egypt.
Yeah,
You know,
yeah,
that
yeah,
kind of
yeah.
story.
Exactly. Yeah, yeah,
We were
yeah,
better
exactly.
off. Um, it's very interesting. So as we've talked about, there's the biological energy and this kind of mysterious energy has
Yeah.
been a theme in season two. You
Yes,
see, those are
yes.
always crossing and overlapping.
Mhm,
Like they're always together,
mhm,
right? In the same way that um kind of these individual care. I want to say because it's like this biological care, existential care, maybe there's different language.
mm,
This individual care, and then you have the issue, individual change. But then there's this social change
mm,
that increases the complexity a thousandfold.
mhm,
I don't think it is by chance that very often when you have self help, it's usually examples of single people. And if they talk about relationships, it's about getting into a relationship. It's not in the relationship because then self help in the relationship, well, if it's self help in a relationship, often it's like you're doing something bad and you should stop. Right. But there's a higher level of competing goods
mm,
which you grew up with from your family, or you have the obligation to take care of your family by paying the bills, but also being with the family. And then there's something, I guess, this ultimate layer of change is the question of how do I change my positioning in this tragedy of competing goods?
mhm,
That is the higher level of like, I feel trapped in a certain way. I
mm,
have
mm,
figured out how to navigate competing goods and it doesn't feel best, but I don't know how to get out of it because if I stop this area, I upset my family. If I do this area, I don't pay the bills. But if I do this area, and you don't know, you've kind of figured out a way to seemingly keep the balls in the air. But there's also a sense of this isn't best, but I don't. But if I can't, but I literally can't drop one of the balls. Like, because a lot of the care could be like, well, just drop one of the balls. Like, which? Family, children, job, like, which, right? So the point is, I'm just saying, like, this question of change, how to change your life, I think often gets stuck on the individual level. But as you
yes,
move up the
yes,
stack and become
yes.
older, it's actually the hardest question is I have figured out a way to juggle all the things I need to juggle, but I don't feel like the way I'm doing it is best,
Yeah,
but I don't know how to change it without dropping a ball.
yes.
And what do I do now? And then you have to do
Mm,
that on top of the individual transformation, eating
mhm.
right, the existential, the social, and so on. There was a lot more to say, but let me throw it to you.
Well, go ahead. I want don't
Well, I guess the issue becomes is that like again, a lot of the self-help, a lot of the energetics really is about what you as an individual can do. And if you don't do that, you're not going to be able, and but the problem is you have to do that to be able to do the next level of change, which is more of the existential.
Mhm.
Okay, so you do the existential, you start coming to terms with, say, living your life in the way you want to, that is thriving even if other people don't understand it. The
Right.
existential, that is, you face your fears,
Mhm,
you do very difficult things. But then there almost is another level of then kind of the tragedy level, I almost want to say, the trade-offs of competing goods,
right.
which is as you've navigated all that and you start to put together a way to live, you start kind of getting a feeling that, okay, all these things that are being juggled are good.
Right.
All of these things actually can kind of create character and develop. But is there's a way better to do this? And you see, the issue is at that point, the reason why earlier I said it's one thing when you say I need to change and I don't like how it currently is because I don't feel good, right?
Mhm,
But when you're in a place of you're juggling all good things and
mhm.
every route you take and everything you're doing feeling good, then it's not obvious what you should do because everything you could do would be giving up a good thing or doing something good less good,
Yeah.
right? And that's where then it becomes more confusing and
Yes.
you get more kind of lost and it's
Absolutely.
not clear what to be done.
Mhm.
More to be said, but let me
Yeah,
throw.
no, that's all really good. I think that's why I am particularly interested. Like, it interests me to learn from, well, frankly, just older mothers,
Yeah, 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 yeah.
because like they
Yeah, because 'cause
they
they've gone through
know
the stack. They've
they
gone through
know,
the stack.
yeah, they know what it means to have like competing goods and to know
Mhm.
what it means to. I mean, if they're writing anything, they probably have some degree of a gifting to teach or to,
It
and
it
so like they're literally trying to cultivate that offering as they also mother and as they also have them own their own individual self. So
absolutely.
for me, I find that, like, personally, I find that to be the most intriguing area of like going after in terms of learning that better. because people who've come before you and have more experience than you often can shed light on different things that you and I was actually thinking about that too. Like sorry, I'll get to but it's funny because I like this little sweet note from one of my friends um
Mm,
for, that she I received it like quite a long time ago now. Anyways, it slipped out from some picture that because the kids like
mm,
a frame it didn't break like the glass didn't shatter, but the frame came off. So that there was a note in the back of this picture. Anyway, long story short, I read it and it was a sweet note from this friend of mine, and the friend was kind of encouraging, like she was encouraging something. It was like this kind of reminder, if you will. And I was thinking about why is it that as humans we can hear certain things and take 10, 12,
yeah,
15
yeah, yeah,
years
yeah.
to really know what that actually means. And I do think a lot of it does come from the problem of thinking about it just in terms of like I'm a 22-year
Yeah,
old college student, to be honest, like no offense,
yeah,
because it feels like well it's simple then, but when it comes to competing goods, I mean that feels way more complicated.
yeah.
It feels way more complicated. At the same time, you still need to rise to the occasion to know how to do that. And
Yes.
something radical about motherhood seems to be this necessity of being one with in a sense like one with your child and children in the sense that they will reflect a lot of your well-being like or lack of well-being. It'll show up in their literally in their lives and in their bodies, um and their physical physicalities, but also they are their own entities, of course. And there's this sort of individuation and integration and kind of collective communal dynamic that is at play so heavily in motherhood that I guess what I mean to say is that it's it does this radical thing of you have to like and that's what birth is, right? Birth is literally the baby becoming its own entity apart
Yeah,
from you,
yeah.
though you still have been one. And so it's and I mean marriage is also like this a lot too, but there's this really really crazy thing where you have to wrap your mind around both things
Yes.
of
Yeah,
like
yeah,
literally doing
yeah,
this stuff
yeah.
as because okay, for example, if you're like I think about Yolande, she just keeps coming to mind, but you know, if you feel a calling to have a mission in the earth to do something and be your mission to be a mother, like you have to sometimes do things where you have to like follow the spirit, if you will, that says you need to write this right now because she writes a lot, you know. So it's like and that means that your children then your husband's watching them or
Mhm,
whatever, some family member, whatever, or your older kids or something like this. And so she has to do a work of like
mm,
fully relinquishing the care that she also has a full responsibility to.
right.
And that's the dynamic that's challenging.
Yes,
It and you have to really be brave, I guess, I don't for lack of a better word, faithful to both
yes,
in a way. And I do think that that's important. I think the world has basically just said, well, you can't do both. You have to either choose, or they just do the infantilization route, which is
yes,
just don't ever become an adult. Which
basically.
don't ever have competing goods. So that was a lot there, but I do think it's important because it really in your really deepest self or in the deepest parts of yourself and your patterning, it's very hard to realize these types of things,
Yes,
and then you have to start doing the practices to be able to do the bothness,
yes,
which is not an easy thing to do, but it's important to do them because they're actually gonna be the best thing for everybody in
yes,
that sense.
yes.
Um, so
Yeah,
yeah,
well, I mean, there's a few things. First, it's not by chance that a lot of the best 21st. This would have to be explained. A lot of the best 21st century thinkers are females. Also, they have the most useful thought with the loss of givens,
hmm
because the loss of givens opens you up to the existential reality of
yes,
trade-offs and
exactly.
absolute choices and things like that. And before that, you could
The focus
fantasize.
of gibbons and
Yes, that's
releases,
correct.
yeah.
Before that, and trade-offs. Before that, you could fantasize about the system that would just problem solve and you wouldn't have and you could have it all. And there's a
Mhm.
tragedy, it would be a larger claim, but a lot of that idea of you can have it all, which, some forms of feminism has stressed. The problem with that is actually the feminine is precisely the revelation of trade-offs, of having to choose these things in a different quality of choice. And this is, I think,
All while being, in a sense, the origin of life
yes.
and all.
But then the argument could be this kind of choice is the origin of life. Like
Exactly.
it goes
Exactly.
with making life in your life. And so if you
Yeah.
can't make this kind of choice, you're not going to thrive.
You're gonna not have more life in your
Correct. You're
life,
not
the
going to have more
vitality
life.
like you're
Yes.
talking
So they
about.
go
Yeah.
together. So the thing is that if we're talking about how to change your life, and it is something like, and again, there's something, and these terms masculine and feminine can get into trouble, but often the change your life is willpower masculine. There's a
Yeah.
certain masculinity to it. And the opposite of feminine can sometimes be associated with right brain or you could resting in and less willpower. Because, but you see, the problem is once you say that, there's already a kind of value judgment. Oh, the feminine has less willpower. Well, that's problematic in a society where willpower is the ultimate value,
Yeah.
right? But what if the feminine is more of the tragic choice? Or the feminine is actually more of this choice that is actually a kind of act of courage,
Yeah.
because what you were saying that's so critical that I think is the only way to deal with the social and existential choice that I don't think is examined when you start talking about individual improvement choice,
Mhm.
which you need to make the next levels. Like you got to do that to do the next levels. The next levels of choice are more so actually relinquishing a certain sort of bravery of saying, I'm going to let my husband watch the kids. You cannot crack the nut
Relinquish,
on
relinquish.
relinquish. You can't
Absolutely.
crack
That's
the
exactly
nut
the word I was thinking
on
of.
existential and social, and these overlap, and maybe there's better language, but you cannot crack the nut on existential problems without relinquish. You can't do it. And you see, the problem is since we think about changing our life purely in terms of willpower, what instead you do when you get to the what people do when they get to the existential or tragic choices, they say, well, I'm just going to do it all. I'm just going to willpower. No, you literally cannot. Like you literally time in the day, and also actually the belief you can do it all is ironically, it sounds really mature and like you're really like an Ubermesh or something, but actually it's infanticizing because you can't do it all. Like there's something truly brave and
Yes.
mature about relinquishing,
Yes.
letting the husband watch the kids, or actually trusting or following the spirit,
Mhm.
like saying, well, I'm going to write this down, right? Like that, and again, we can sometimes associate following the muse with a certain flightiness and a lack of system and whatever. But actually, that can arguably be a greater form of bravery and courage because you
It
have to
is.
relinquish you have to follow the unknown,
Yes.
right? You don't have your
Yes.
system that's going in. So there's something about, so I guess what I'm saying, and I'll throw it back to you, is that when we talk, most people, when they talk about change, they're talking about something more individual and how to basically feel better. That can be in the realm of willpower, but I would also argue ultimately that is habit even more than willpower.
Yeah.
You got to architecturally, but it can take willpower to start
Yeah.
the architectural habit making. Okay, so you've done all that.
And
Um,
that there's a place for that. Like
well, you
that is
can't do the
relevant.
next 2 without that.
Yeah.
Okay, so you've done that, but now you start moving to social and existential change. Like you
Yes.
feel as if how you navigate your relationships is overly influenced by norms that you grew up with, and you
Mhm.
can't really think outside the box, or
Fears.
fears, or
Yep.
different things like that. Well, once you start moving to that, the way you change them is actually more like acts of relinquishment, more like acts of
1000%.
giving up. But if the way you got to the place to make those kind of decisions was more in the realm of willpower and individual, like training or something, then it would make sense that you would just keep doing that. But if you keep doing that, it's not going to give you the results you want. You've got to move to the non-rational move of relinquishment, or you get a Nash equilibrium.
Yeah, 1000%. 1000%. And that lines up so perfectly with what this book is about,
Mm.
um, by Yolande, on the art of choosing. And so it's yeah, it's I think though that it just our brains sort of kind of buzz out. Like it's
Yeah,
almost like it
because
short it's like it doesn't, because we have to like rewire. We're kind of get like this
yeah, being
short
human is
circuiting.
crazy because to
Because
succeed at
I don't know how to
you
I don't
literally have to, like, the only way you succeed at this is to have X wiring. But then to succeed at the next thing that's really important, X wiring is what keeps you from succeeding it. So getting older is this, there's no one and done. There's this continual sort of rewiring. That's why lifelong learning is being human.
Mm,
Like if you don't learn your life, you're gonna inevitably
mhm,
overfit something that worked. And this is, I guess, what I want to stress is one of the reasons why people don't get the change they want in their life is because they think the choice is between something that works and doesn't work. No, it's the choice between something that used to work and now doesn't, and something that does work, but you've never tried often.
exactly. Yeah.
So
You've
it's
never stepped
you,
into it
you've
fully.
never
Yeah.
stepped into it fully, but you've been led to believe that the way you kind of change your life for the good is doing the thing that works versus the thing that doesn't. Get the A instead of the F on the test.
Do the good thing
Do
versus
the
the
good
bad
things
thing.
versus the bad. But
The
as you get
good thing
older,
versus the nexus of all the goods, right? The
yes,
competing goods.
yeah, exactly. But as you get older, it becomes more of a choice between something that used to work, and you have every reason to think that it would work now because it's what you're used to, versus something different that actually is what you need to do to work, but it's going to feel more like faith and courage and strange, right?
Strange.
So
Yeah, for sure.
so if you simply ask the question of what works, that's not going to give you the answer. In fact, it's likely to have you go back to the old habit loop, and
Exactly.
then you're in the suboptimal result. You never get
Mhm.
out of it. But that in of itself is a philosophical analysis. So philosophize your life. So
It's
there's a yeah, so but it moves to a relinquishment, absolutely to a relinquishment.
I was thinking on that point you made about the one wiring to do the first level
Mhm.
may not be the sufficient wiring for the next
Could
level.
be the opposite.
Yeah, and I think that is important because it really is this kind of, again, it makes me think about like this bothness, because your brain will also kind of want to be like, well, which wiring is it? Is it
Yes,
this one or is it this
because
one?
it's the
And it's like,
frenemy.
no, you do a double installation. Like you're able to actually expand in the fact that you have you're running a dual process or something like
Yes,
that. It's a
you're
dynamic
naturally
process.
stuck in understanding versus reason in
Right.
Hegel. You're stuck in AA versus AB thinking, and it's very difficult to get out of
Yeah.
that.
Yeah. Because really the initial circuitry, if you want to call it that. Um, I do think that in our modern age, you probably will have to do something that is already rewiring to create positive habits for
The loss
your
of
body.
givens means the plausible deny the loss of givens means the chances of staying in AA and it being okay is far
Yeah,
less. You're
yeah.
increasingly having to move in the AB
So
direction.
like that should help you on the next level, I think.
Sure,
Like because
as a forcing function.
yeah, well, because the fact of the matter is that that wiring you're going to need to do to create habits for your body, like to feel more energy. Um, because it's actually quite related. Like in the sense that it can be thought of as like, well, the way you do that is gonna maybe possibly be the opposite of how you're gonna do the next level. I think there is something that is true about that. And there's
Once
also
you move to the next, there's a sublation.
I think that's yeah, I
Yeah.
think that's what I'm
Once
trying
you
to get
move
at.
to the next, then they
And
kind of overlap more.
I think you actually can
But that
incorporate
initial step is very difficult
yeah,
because it's
yeah.
counterintuitive.
Well, yeah, definitely. It's definitely counterintuitive.
Yes.
And the weird thing is, though, sometimes that counterintuitive stuff is so simple. It's so simple.
Yes.
Like even if you're just thinking about like spend more time outdoors, it's probably going to be better for your,
Yes.
like well, some people may not believe this, and this is why the secondary level does actually influence the first level because your beliefs about what is health and what
Yes.
is
Yes.
optimal is going to be
Absolutely.
defined
They're
by
not hard. They're
yeah,
not
yeah, they're
tough
always
split.
related. Right,
It's
right.
Hegelian. You realize it was always already
Yeah,
kind of thing.
exactly, exactly.
But you have to go through the journey to get that.
Yeah. But it's funny how like say you do believe that and you experience that being outdoors more help is feels better in your body,
Right.
right? Well, then that can seem so simple to assent to. Like, yeah, that's good. I
Yep.
should, I should do that. Don't I do that? And then you actually rack up your time and you think about how much time are you actually spending outdoors or not, especially when it gets cooler or
Yes.
whatnot. And you're like, that's kind of harder than
Yes.
I thought it would. Like it does take, like you're saying, this initial pushing. Like you have to kind of go in a direction that you're not used to going.
Right.
And actually, it's simple. It's just doing something that you're not used to doing.
Yes.
So there's almost a hardness in its simplicity, if that makes any
Yes.
sense, or like
Yes.
a hard in its ease, or something weird going on there. It's kind of like the burden is light,
Yes.
the yoke is easy.
Yes.
It's
Yes.
really like what scripture says in that regard, because it's like it's not. It's actually when you start to do it, you're like, "Oh, it could it really be this simple? Really?"
Yes.
And I don't mean to
But
belittle it, but I'm saying like it. There's something actually about like a type of simplicity maybe in maybe the technical sense. I don't know. I know you have there's a technical sense up to that word, but like there's something that actually is a type of simplifying. And then because you're so used to the complex of
yeah, simple
what you've
means without extension.
right,
Yeah.
you've kind of had to rely on your justifications for this that, and the other, and reliances on this device and this and this and
Yeah.
that, or this form, whatever it
Yeah.
is. And then you're like, there's almost a disbelief in the simplicity of what it could be.
Yeah, because it would mean you'd have to acknowledge everything you did before was wrong, and then if everyone else is doing the
Yeah, yeah.
complex, there's a
They're like,
social
you're wrong.
dimension
Yeah.
to this.
Yeah. That's
Like,
what
and
you
that gets
keep
in,
bringing up, that
yeah,
there
the
is a
social
social
dimension.
dimension.
Because if you're spending out, well, being outside is play. You should be inside working. What are you
Yeah.
doing
Yeah.
outside? So you have to be able to relinquish your how people see you,
Yeah.
like having control over how you're seen. Right. That's something
Exactly.
you
That's
have
a
to
huge part of it.
relinquish.
That's a huge part of
Yeah,
it.
and you can't if you say, "Well, I'm gonna just start doing what people will see as good," like, because that's the logic that got you to getting
To
up at
feeling
5
good.
AM and feeling good, but you do that with the social, well, now you're just doing what everyone thinks you should do, and you're not outside like you need to be, or doing the other things you need to do to thrive, right?
Yeah.
So if you
Yeah.
move to the social, you actually have to relinquish, your control over how people see you to a certain degree. Now, that doesn't mean you become an a-hole or something
Sure.
like
Sure.
that, but you have to be okay with seeming weird.
Oh,
Like, it's going to be
absolutely.
very difficult to thrive if you're not okay being seen as weird. The willingness to be seen as weird and having any chance at all of thriving in life go together strongly.
Yeah, that's
But
a
that's
huge point,
relinquishment.
and that's relinquishing, yeah,
Yes.
exactly, and relinquishment, and it's also to your point about the fact that on the existential level, it's not simply just feeling good. It's not that it's not feeling good, but it's that it also requires relinquishing what other people think about you, which at first will feel like you can
Ex-
get
e- e-
you can get kind of triggered by other people's triggering
yes.
instead of seeing that, oh wait, why am I still getting triggered by that? Maybe I don't actually believe what I say I believe
Yeah.
or do, or I'm not fully in what I say I'm going to do.
Yes.
And so it's very convicting.
Well, in
And
this
that doesn't always feel good, but eventually when you get through that, you get to that, like I said, that simplicity, which means people will still think you're weird, but you're completely at ease with that.
Well, joy is on the other side of challenge. Joy has to be existential, and
Mm,
existential joy is on the other side of existential anxiety. And the
mm,
choice is either going through the existential anxiety or having your life defined by a lack of anything worthy of being anxious about, which becomes kind of flat in a kind of empty
mhm,
equilibrium. I think also what's being
yeah.
described here is why there's a temptation for hikikomoriaism or just kind of separating from the social. Because if in order to kind of thrive or be what you approximate happiness, which are not quite the same. But what can happen is you say, well, I have to seem weird, but okay, I'll just be a hikikomori and be weird or something, but not be seen.
I'll be a
So
bumblebee
yeah,
for
and
the
I'll be
mission.
happy. And a lot of hikikomoris like they're happy.
Yeah.
Not all, there can always be an assumption that these people more isolated would want to change or stuff like that. That's not always the case in any way whatsoever. But you see, that is the
And what's the problem? They're
problem.
not hurting anybody.
Exactly,
They're fine.
exactly. And
Yeah,
they've achieved the first kind of change where they found an individual routine that works well. And what is your push for the next, right?
exactly.
Well, there has to be a suggestion that changing on this existential and social level to something more human, well, this is where you have to have an idea of the beautiful, as Joachim will stress.
Yeah.
Is if you're just thinking the good, well, then forget that, and you'll just stay on level one. And so once you, without the beautiful, once you achieve feeling good by yourself, you're done. And whatever, like, why would you worry about some possibility on the other side of feeling bad for the social unless you have a doctrine of the beautiful? And then, of course, what that's going to lead you to, the unintended consequence, and we'd have to elaborate on this, but we talk with Jockin and others on it all the time, is that if your doctrine is the good without the beautiful,
Mm,
then change will mean making you feel energetically better. That almost inevitably will lead to acts of freedom from, which
mm,
versus freedom in. So you're
mm,
going to abandon determinations, abandon responsibilities, maybe leave your family or stuff like
mhm.
that, because that's good. You feel good, and you genuinely do feel good, and that's the problem. That's
Well,
precisely the problem.
and that's why just I brought up maybe energy can be a good barometer. It's not. It's interesting because it's almost like that's energy, but not in touch with. I want to almost say like I mean, I don't know. Maybe there'd probably be a whole lot to get into right there. But what I'm trying to say is that again, you can get energy on the prime on the very like primordial level of the body
Mhm.
that is not necessarily aligned with your spiritual energy.
Well, the way I would put it, yes. And what I would say is it's a contingent energy. You haven't learned how to have energy or joy except when you're away from these people or away from this job. You
Mm,
haven't been able to find energy and joy in it.
in
The
it,
the
yeah.
art of living, to use that illic sense, or what I think a lot of the challenge of being human is finding energy, finding beauty, and I think finding beauty and finding energy are strongly tied together. Like beauty creates energy. That's really important. Like energy, like beauty is not simply an experience of aesthetic pleasantry. It's a strike that creates inspiration and energy. A lot of the question of being human and the challenge of being human is basically being able to generate energy anywhere.
One to discern energy
Yes,
differently
to
because
discern.
it's not just on the like I said, it's not just on the level of, oh, finally I'm not dealing with that frustrating person,
Yeah, but
so
that's
now I feel
contingent then.
energy.
You can
Yeah,
only have it when you're
yeah.
not dealing with
Well, I
that.
have energy. I must be like, I've got,
I
but
must
it's
have
not
made the right decision
right.
because I'm
Hmm.
feeling energy now. And so, therefore, if you're trapped in the vector of the good, you're just going to avoid frustrating people and you're going to make yourself good, makes you fragile without the
Hmm.
beautiful in the way we describe it. Like you're going to do what feels good and you'll become fragile and
Hmm.
that'll work until, well, it doesn't, or you enclose yourself.
And
And
what,
that leads inevitably to enclosure to
yeah,
preserve your energy.
and that's actually interesting because maybe the distinction that could be helpful, I don't know, just it's coming to mind, could potentially be an external energy and an internal
Yes,
energy.
intrinsic
Yeah,
motivation.
like
Yeah, yeah.
because it's a lot. Because to me, what I'm thinking is, I think a lot of people understand energy just as like the thing they can get.
Yes. Oh,
They can
yes.
just get this
Yes.
or not get it. They get it or they don't get it.
There's a
But
transactional energy and
yes,
there's a
yes,
cultivated
exactly.
energy.
And that versus the energy that literally comes out of nowhere. Like we're talking
Yeah.
about this
Yeah.
this
The
mysterious
mysterious energy. Yeah.
generation of energy like
Mhm.
out of nowhere because of beauty, truth, and goodness, because
Yes.
of, conversations like this. Like
Yes.
there's this energy that just yeah, just literally comes out of nowhere
Yes.
and you participated in its generation
Yes.
and then you're and it's something that you yeah, so it's something it does feel like something much more inside that is stable because for example, with this back to the frustrating person that is taking your energy, right? It's either take or give. It's this
Yep.
constant, what you actually need to learn to do with the frustrating person is to maintain your internal energy,
Yes.
your internal calm,
Yes.
so that you don't let that person you don't believe some sort of like uh almost determination that it's only about taking or giving and I can't be happy unless that person
Right.
does something differently.
Yeah.
You know
Yeah.
what I'm saying?
Yeah. Yeah.
And
Yeah.
that's a
And
problem.
then
Like
you're a
that's
slave. You're
yeah,
kind of
yeah,
slave.
yeah, exactly. You're not free, and
No.
that's where people prefer in a sense, we don't
Yes.
we say we want freedom, but we don't really want freedom because it's then it means
Yeah.
you
We
have to
want to
actually
be
do
free from
something.
freedom. That's what we want.
Right. And so it's just like the reason why that feels more challenging, but why it's so important is it's ultimately through the work going to lead you to be more resilient, more capable, and more at ease in any circumstance. And that's where you need to learn how to develop that's where you get into touch with that type of energy. And that being the one that can be yes, you still will have again, when you there's certain inputs that have certain outputs in terms of energy, okay, like food, like all the things of the habits, right? That's true, that's there. But this is the thing where it's the social existential, it's with other people. And that's where if you're still
Yeah.
using the input output with humans and thinking that, well, it's just their fault or it's just whatever, or it's just my self-degrading, it's all my fault in that sense, and just avoiding
Yeah.
responsibility still, then you're not thinking about it in terms of a energy cultivation
Yeah.
within yourself that can be uh and will have a dialectical relationship with the more kind of base level energy. But
Well,
yeah, it's important because I think this internal external helps me understand what you should be using as a barometer for like doing the change that we're talking about at the very beginning of the and throughout this conversation,
well,
if that
it
makes
would
any
seem
sense.
to me, um, as if,
So one thing really quick, sorry. People
please.
think, oh well, if I just change again, people actually use change unfortunately as a way to avoid
Oh,
the inner
absolutely,
work
absolutely,
of the
absolutely.
inner cultivation of energy. And
They
that's
use
why you
change to be
can't
freedom
just
from.
yeah,
Yes,
and that's why even though we talk about change a lot and it is important, you can start to use change as a way to not change.
absolutely.
So that's where you need philosophy, and that's why you have to see the nuance of that. It's on a different level. Um but it's really important because otherwise again you're doing the spurious infinity.
Yes, absolutely.
And that's what you're
Well,
yeah,
it
sorry.
would
Go
seem
ahead.
to me that the mysterious energy almost seemingly always, I mean, it seems strongly tied to relinquishment, which
Mm,
is a term that kind of means Hegel's negation,
mm,
like the negation, right? And the negation of the next and
mm,
all that. So, it does seem to me as if relinquishment and and mysterious energy go together. Because if you start talking about architecture and moving this chair on your room, and you're talking about I don't have that's an act of saying I don't control this mysterious energy. I can only
mm.
create the conditions possibility for it, right?
Yes.
So like when we talked about like arranging or like all of this kind of apprehension, there's this sense in a lot of these conversations of there's something you don't control that happens. Right.
Hmm.
So if you live your life in a way that is trying to create the conditions of possibility for this strike of beauty or this apprehension or this noose or these new architectures where a mysterious energy appears, there's latent in that a relinquishment. There's a
Mm,
certain
mm,
act of I don't control,
mm.
right? Now, the key is that relinquishment can be active, right?
And that's
Like,
the again, that's what
yes,
it is.
yes,
It's not just a because see relinquishing in a cheap, I
yes,
like your distinctions you'll use with Bonhoeffer,
yeah,
right?
yeah.
Cheap versus costly. The cheap relinquishment is just, I mean, honestly, like if you're
Throw away
well,
almost.
yeah, do drugs. I mean, I
Yeah,
don't know,
yeah, yeah,
just
yeah.
do anything to make yourself
Feel better.
feel
Yeah,
better and
yeah,
to
yeah.
just relinquish my like you're
Yeah,
saying,
let it go
relinquish your
or let go
responsibility.
kind of thing.
Yeah, it's like that's a cheap relinquishing, and I don't
Yeah,
even know if you could say that is genuine relinquishment at that point. But what's actual
right.
relinquishing in this mature and this powerful, because it again, that's not free actually.
Mhm.
Even though it feels like, well, I'm just letting myself be free to do this, but really, your real freedom is going to come in the choice. So you're doing a choosing of
Mm.
your relinquishing. You're
Yeah.
doing a
Yeah, yeah.
relinquishing in, right? Like
Yeah,
you're
and
saying.
not from.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah, that's
exactly.
right.
So
Because
I
if
mean,
it's from, it's spurious. If it's
I
in,
know
it
that.
could be a true infinity kind of thing.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
I just think that's important too.
Well, and if the mysterious energy is always on the other side of a relinquishment, again, that's not willpower. Now, it may take willpower to relinquish, but then the willpower goes away. Like it's that initial act of relinquishment. But then what's interesting, this is my point. Like willpower is supposed to be, willpower can have a role to be the one step and then the rest takes care of itself in a certain sense. But if willpower is needed for the whole, there's going to be breakdown. It's not going to work. Right. So it has to be something like willpower has to be like 5%. And the 95% is the mysterious energy. Like that's how willpower leads to breakthrough. Like willpower cannot lead to breakthrough unless it taps into a mysterious energy.
Mm,
So willpower will lead to breakdown if it doesn't lead to mysterious energy. Well, that
that's really
means
big. That's a
that
huge point.
means willpower is tied to relinquishment.
Mhm,
At the end of the day, it always will be.
mhm,
Like all of the stuff you did to cultivate your willpower, to get up at 4 in the morning, go to the gym, and do all of that stuff for individual change, so that you had willpower. That's really important because you need the willpower to be able to have the willpower to do the relinquishment.
yeah.
The problem becomes people try to do everything by more and more willpower. So then they say, well, let me train more and get up earlier. And I'll get up 3 a.m. and I'll get more willpower. There is no amount of willpower you can get that can do the work of the mysterious energy on the other side of, relinquishment,
Mhm,
because it is necessarily entropic,
mhm,
where the mysterious energy has a positive feedback loop
mhm,
that becomes negentropic. So if you're playing the game of willpower, it
mhm.
becomes an addition that must break down, and entropy
Mhm.
wins. Ultimately, entropy wins. But if
What do
the
you can
will
you say like what do you mean by entropy wins?
equilibrium breakdown, like it runs out, like it's not going to
Mhm,
take you to the end, right? Like
mhm,
it will run out. And then furthermore, the other issue is willpower doesn't tell you what you should do in competing goods. Like willpower doesn't tell you what to do. Maybe it takes a whole lot of you could argue it takes a whole lot of willpower and courage to leave your marriage, or a whole lot of willpower in order to overcome feeling bad about leaving your kids or leaving your coworkers. Like you can frame these things any way you want, right? And if you only have the mental model of willpower, the likelihood of you overfitting that mental model and making a terrible decision is much higher because it's the only model you got.
mhm,
Like the chances of you misusing a hammer go up if it's the only tool you have, right?
mhm,
But if you have many tools, the likelihood you use a hammer well goes up. Like
mhm,
that's the funny thing. When you have many tools, the likelihood you use each one of those tools better goes up. Whereas if you only have one tool, the likelihood you use it poorly goes up because you're going to use it in situations you shouldn't. So that's what happens with willpower. And we get very confused.
mhm,
And also, we tend to use willpower because then there's an ethic that
mhm,
goes with capitalism and the market that really applauds that and applauds, hard work and different things. And that's all good and well. But then if that is not making space for the possibility of relinquishment, you never pass over into the mysterious Sabbath rest, and you break down. You never get breakthrough. You never thrive. So willpower needs to be worked on and cultivated so that you can take the step of relinquishment,
mhm,
not to replace relinquishment, if that
mhm,
if that
mhm.
makes sense. If it never leads to relinquishment, you're going to be in big trouble.
No, I think that's huge. I think that's huge, and it also reminds me a lot of what Yolanda talks about with birth, because
There's a relinquishment in that.
yeah, because the book's also about like actually blissful birth,
Yep.
which is I think there's a lot of and it's so evident how related and overlapping this is because when you have such a willpower mindset, then you cannot equate something like because we get stuck in like the push, 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 hard, 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 hard. Whereas the relinquishing is actually the place where you allow yourself to be able to be a vessel for the transformation, which actually can be in joy.
Right.
And it's not and actually your body, like I guess what I mean to say is the willpower can lead to a reification of pain as love. Like we said, like pain is the ultimate like strength
Mm.
when really obviously there's a lot that would have to be unpacked on that in terms of pain, etc. But what it really is trying to or she's trying to point to, I believe, is the fact that unless you do this willpower to is the step that initiates a relinquishment, you choose a type of pain
Yeah.
and
Absolutely.
and you
And
choose it
and then you moralize it
and then you
as
moralize it
yeah.
and then you and then you're shocked and kind of just I don't know how to put it, you're almost like shocked by that. like, because it's so shocking. But and yet it's like and it's a really strange thing because and I think a lot of times people because we get so ingrained to think like we like to think that it could only be a certain way because then we don't have to consider that there's other potentialities. It's the same with like, for example, the fact that somebody could have healed from something, okay, naturally or whatever. Like they just that can be scary, even though it should be really exciting and like, wow,
Yeah,
that's incredible. It can be scary to people, and people will say that could never happen because they feel scared. They feel more safe in the prescriptions and the sort of
it's
identifications that
existential. Yeah,
yeah, it's existential because you think, "Well, wait a second, if somebody else could do it, I guess maybe I could do that
yeah,
too."
right.
And then there could be fear, "Well, what if I don't?" And what
Yeah,
all of the
yeah,
failure
that's
around
right.
that, versus realizing that it's really just kind of sitting with the idea of possibility,
Yeah.
the conditions for possibility.
But you have to be
And
able to handle possibility,
right,
and that's existential training. That's Nietzschean childhood. I mean,
right,
that's the beautiful. Like, you're
yeah,
only gonna be able to sit with that if you believe doing that
mhm,
work
mhm,
opens up conditions of possibility for experiencing the beautiful that otherwise couldn't be
mhm,
so
mhm.
opened up.
And I guess why I wanna bring that back to birth is just because if you do have to relinquish the child, like, you're
Yes.
relinquishing them from your body. So, you do like, the reason why it's important to do the work, no matter what the outcome is in terms of, uh what I mean to say is, like, regardless of how one might think about it, it is still ultimately going to be a breakthrough, right? A relinquishing. And in a sense, if you cannot conceptualize that, you end up seeing and going through the process as really just a breakdown.
Yeah,
And people,
exactly.
and a lot of women also do have a lot of, I want to say almost trauma type things
Yeah.
related and around birth and postpartum and
Yes.
depression. Like there's a lot wrapped up in that that just leaves people to not maybe being in the fullness of the joy that it actually was always kind of designed for us
Yeah.
to be
Yeah, yeah.
like this almost superhuman type of experience.
Yeah.
And so I'm just saying that this matters because willpower will lock you into potentially probably
Yeah.
break down versus break through or breaking apart uh, uh versus relinquishing,
Yeah.
which is then your again instead of breaking apart and it feeling like this really kind of like beautiful but also painful thing, it's like this transformative incredible experience where you start to see that the beauty is in the relinquishing,
Yeah.
and that can be actually something that is not only beautiful but also like joyful.
Yeah.
Joyful not just in the thought but like in the feeling of it. So anyways, I just want to say
Well,
that
I
really
mean,
quick.
most people.
It's that might be a little out there, but
No, no, but well, a lot
I
of
want
people
to
would
I
say that's weird. But the point
yeah,
we said earlier is that if you're not willing to be seen as weird, you can't thrive.
yeah,
I
yeah,
know Paul's gonna get up in a minute.
yeah,
So,
yeah.
but
I know we have to wrap it up.
but
Well,
yeah, why
it's a lot to sit with, yeah.
a people how can a people thrive that for whom the ethical is suffering?
Mhm.
Like we and you
That's
see
why it goes back to why even though it's very strange to talk about, especially it might seem unrelatable to talk about birth, but I think why it matters so much is because we have to think about what does actually seem to be the human's thriving condition.
the beautiful.
Exactly. And
I mean, and this is the problem. Like, if you're stuck in the vectors of the good, then almost inevitably it will end up into willpower and suffering.
yeah,
Is the ethics of the people.
yeah.
But if it's the beautiful, the ethics of the beautiful are going to be
Mhm,
very, very different.
mhm,
And Jockin
mhm.
has a class coming up in Parallax that everyone should take. That's
Please
going to be
take
talking
it.
about that.
Yeah.
But if you're stuck in the vector of the good, because what ends up happening to explain that and then a few more things is the good will almost necessarily become suffering because inevitably people will face the limits of whatever good they pursue.
Yeah.
So the goods will fail. Well, that when goods fail, you either have the choice of saying, well, maybe that's because we so played into beauty. But if
Yes.
you've lost beauty, there's only one way you can go. You can say the failure is itself the good. Like failure itself is good. Like suffering is good, even if we don't achieve anything. Like that's a way that you can stay in the
Definitely.
good and follow the good once you've had the experience of your idols crashing or fail or goods failing or different things like that.
Mhm.
Like it's like in the kind of Lacanian sense, like if the objects of desire never fulfill desire, well then you make it good for desire never to be fulfilled. Like you make that the ethical. You're an ethical person because you were never happy, right? Or you make and you see, and of course, what ends up happening is that deep down people know that doesn't work, right? Or they unfortunately religions have to come in to really make people convinced of this. But if deep down people don't know it doesn't work, they have a reaction to an individual exit from their obligations and their family than you get the rush of freedom from,
Mhm.
right? So getting this right is really, really important because if it can lead to an identification of suffering as what you should do, and I think that's there's not going to be thriving in that, and religions can go in that way, which I think holds back the potential of religions to be beautiful
Yeah.
and to lead to full humanity.
Mhm.
And simultaneously, that also creates the probability of people having sudden midlife or whatever ejections from
Yes.
that,
Yes.
that then they leave everything behind and to feel free to have the joy of the freedom from that isn't joy
Mhm.
but a simulacra. So it's very important to get this all straight.
Yeah.
Um, I guess what I just want to say is on the relinquishment stuff. Like basically, as you get older, like you cannot have thriving without the mysterious energy.
Mm.
And the mysterious energy is on the other side of relinquishment that you need willpower to do, but the willpower needs to pass over, to use that Hegelian language, into the mysterious energy.
Mhm.
So there's a relinquishment there.
Yeah.
That relinquishment has a non-rationality to it. It always does.
Mhm.
Because if you say, like you see my children, my husband will watch the children, I'm gonna follow this. I have this urge to write something down, I'm just gonna do it. It's not rational, but it's
Yeah.
not irrational, it's non-rational.
Exactly.
Right. And something really could happen to your children. Something bad really could happen. Right. But that's why it would be rational to never let them go, right? And to just hold them and to never relinquish, right? So there's something fundamentally non-rational.
Mhm.
It's no different than when we talk about like people have very good reason for not being outside. They're working their
And
jobs,
they
they're
might
getting
get
their
bit by a
paycheck.
bug. I
And
don't
they
know.
might get bit by a bug and they might get a tick bite or something. They have good reason not to do it. Or people have very good reason to be doing
But
their
that's the thing.
emails until midnight. There's
Yeah.
always good
There's
reason.
always good reason.
This is, but this, the reason why this is so important
Yes. Yes.
is because therefore, if your only way to understand decision is
Mm.
making good decision, you're done. You're going to end
Yeah.
up, you're
Yeah.
never going to be able to think relinquishment
Yeah.
because it will always be relinquishing a good.
Yeah.
And there will always be good reason not to relinquish. And so you're trapped. You're
I
trapped.
also think that,
And then you're gonna react by going back to individual change and getting up at 2 a.m. now, to feel because you're just
yeah.
gonna what ends up happening is you try to individually optimize to feel better about these existential conundrums that no amount of individual optimization ever comes through. Because no amount of increasing efficiency or being more rational gets you through an S equilibrium. You have to do something non-rational.
Yep.
But
Yep.
but if getting up at 3 a.m. made you feel better, and I'm facing this new thing that I don't feel good about, let me try 2 a.m. Let me try 1 a.m. Let me just not sleep. And then that's what people are doing. Like, how do I do this? Like 30
Well,
minutes sleep, Tim Ferriss stuff. So you get this crazy optimization because it's a reasonable, that's the problem,
yeah.
existential reaction
Yeah.
to lacking the ability to think the non-rational.
Yeah. Very good. Very well said. And I want to say really quick, slipping this in, uh, I think, and this is so you and Jockin are so good on this with like the how the good, captures. It's kind of like we think, we're talking about beauty, but really it's a good.
It's the good
Yeah,
capture.
and I
Yeah.
think that's actually what a lot of I think that's what a lot of times we do with, when I was saying suffering as love, where we're like we just sort of decide that okay, well, we can't avoid, look, obviously, like there is suffering in life, of course there is, but the point of the matter is that when you make an ethic about
It
suffering.
never passes over to the beautiful.
No, but but guess what? You just decide that is beautiful.
Well, yeah,
But it's
that's
but
when
it's but
yes,
it's actually a good. And so
yes,
you like
that's
you're
exactly
cutting
right.
yourself off from beauty because in the name of beauty because you've decided that it has to be that way. Because and because it, whatever it is, you just decide it has to be that way. I guess because I think I see people do that too, where they start to talk about things that are like ugly and broken as beauty. And I think
Oh,
that
yes,
and
it's a major
I think
problem.
there's a problem there. I'm not saying that
It's a
there's
major
no
problem.
relationality between broken and ugly and beauty. Of course there
If
is.
it
But
passes over
yeah,
into beauty, but just
right.
because it is broken does not mean it is therefore beautiful.
Exactly. And you have to be careful that you don't start to
But
just
people don't wanna
reduce
be
your
mean. They
understanding
feel
of
like they're being judgmental if they do
yeah.
that, and they don't wanna be mean, and
Or
the
they don't want to be unrealistic because they're like, well, of course, it's just pain and suffering all the way down. So, we just that's what we have to see. We have to find beauty in that.
yes, and you won't.
Well,
Um,
but you'll decide you have, and you'll
but
limit yourself from
of course,
understanding
yes,
the fullness of
enclosure.
what beauty
Yes, you're
really
getting
is.
enclosures
Yeah.
and so on and so forth.
Yeah. And pleasure and all of
And
the, yeah. Right.
yes, well, this is why very often we'll like when you said the collapsing of the terms good and beautiful cut you off from beauty, that's exactly right. One of
Yeah.
the reasons we so often will be pulling terms apart is
Yes.
because
Yes.
the number one way you cut yourself off from reality is a conflation of terms.
1000%.
So once you conflate
Yes.
terms, you cut yourself off
Yeah.
from reality
Yeah.
because reality is the multiplicity of those terms having distinction. And if those terms do collapse, then you need to figure that out to realize that actually seeing them as separate is apart from reality. So it can
Yes.
go both ways, but this pulling apart terms to see if they're distinct
Mm,
is really perhaps, well, I think it's at the root of the intellectual act that makes us human. And it's
mhm,
that's one of the reasons why you'll see, I think, philosophy and theology obsessed with language, or you'll have these terms about terms, because one of the key ways we cut ourselves off from reality is by conflating terms. And
mm,
we've done that with the beautiful and the good. In the same way that what we're saying is we've conflated different kinds of changes into
mm.
all being the same
Exactly.
change. So then we can't
Exactly.
think change once you get to the social and
Mm,
existential level, and we never mature. And then we whiplash back into individual optimization
mhm,
when you have to deal with a tragic trade-off, when you have to deal with a relinquishment,
mhm,
right? Like if
mhm.
you're not ready to think relinquishment change as distinct from individual optimization, then you're going to collapse them into using the methodologies of individual optimization and willpower for relinquishment when that's going to actually lead to a lot of trouble.
Yeah. And why this, just one really quick example too of like why parsing these terms matters so much. Because also if you do believe that suffering is love, well,
Then you should call suffering.
well, that's the thing. Like, don't be surprised that in your marriage you literally have a phenomenological experience of your relationship as suffering.
Yeah, you
That
the
you would
incentive
cause
structure.
suffering.
Yeah,
And so it's like, oh, well, this is just that, that's so out there to think like words affect your reality. No, they literally do all
if
the
you
time.
conflate
So if
them,
you,
yes.
yeah, if you conflate them, it means you need to get just broad, like, we talked about this before, unpack the zip file, dudes. Like, yes, is there some element of suffering in life? Of course there is. But when you conflate, right? This is the compressed, when you conflate suffering as love, right? Again, don't be shocked that that impacts your reality of how you experience your relationship,
The way I would,
because
yeah,
and how you have a confusion over how to navigate in that relationship, because
completely.
and the fact that, like you said, you also probably cause a lot of suffering too. So
Well, the way that, we might put it with metaphysics is that, like you're saying, words matter. A
yeah,
way I might put it is that categories matter.
yeah,
Like if you conflate the categories of beauty and good, you're done. If you conflate the categories of suffering and love, you're in trouble, right? Because there's a ditch on the side of the road where if you can treat words as a magic spell
sure,
that we've talked about, and like if I said, oh no, now we're all dead because I said this term or whatever,
right,
which can be very problematic. And the reason why that's problematic is because you're not actually doing the work of language.
hmm,
You have a paranoia of language. You're not
yeah,
doing the work of language.
yeah,
The work of language is metaphysics, which is dealing with categories. If you're if words matter, I completely agree with you in the sense that they lead to the conflation and collapse of categories.
yes,
And
and
if
then experiential
and then
difference.
once your categories are collapsed together, well then that is through which you filter and make sense of your experience. You have to use categories, maps, etc. to experience reality. So once love becomes suffering, love equals suffering. The categories overlap. Therefore, when you're experiencing suffering, it's under the category of love. And everything makes sense. And what makes sense is to create more suffering because that creates more love and you're in huge trouble. So in that sense, I
And
can
unfortunately see it all the time.
constantly, but basically the argument is without philosophizing your life, it becomes basically practically inevitable that categories conflate, that if they conflate, you won't thrive. It's just almost inevitable because there's always, and I know we're out of time, there's always something plausible about the most dangerous conflation of categories. Like it's plausible that love
Yes,
entails
yes,
suffering.
yes.
It seems right because there's some degree of truth to it.
Mm,
That's why it's so and you see that, like once you start talking about the problem of conflating love and suffering, that's the stakes of being human. That's where your life hangs in the balance to get this right.
yeah, yeah.
Um and the problem is the things that your life's thriving depends on have a tens of reality. They have a tens of plausibility
A
to them.
tinge of it.
Yeah, a tens of it. In the
Yeah.
same way, it's like Satan's friggin' temptations in the wilderness. All of them are reasonable. All of them have a tens of reasonability to it. It makes sense. We'll just jump down. The angels will pick you up. This is your what? I'll give it to you. You're God anyway. So it's like it all makes
Mm.
sense.
Yeah.
And you see, and how are you going to catch, let me put it this way, when you're dealing with individual optimization, you're not really having to worry about any kind of collapsing of categories. Like, are you going to get up before him or not? Are you going to run or not? We know what running is. It's. I don't want to say there's none of it, but the collapsing of categories problem, the words problem, like language, like your individual optimization and change you want to see in that area is probably not impacted by your words, right? Maybe it's impacted by you not living up to your words,
We're not defining your
No,
words.
not defining your
No.
words, and I don't want to say it has no impact, but what I want to say is the more you start moving toward the big changes like existential and social, the more, yeah, the collapsing of categories makes all the difference. And the reason why it's so likely for you to make those mistakes, all of us, is because the collapses are always reasonable. They always have a tinge of truth to them, and you're not going to be able to tell the difference between what is seemingly the case versus what is the case unless you philosophize your life
Mhm.
and you're able to discern. Because why would you ever question the idea that love is suffering? Because do not people who love one another make sacrifices for one another? The problem is when people say that, what they're getting at is sacrifice. So they'll say love is suffering, but what they mean is love is sacrifice. But here's the problem again: language has a certain sort of sliding to it, a certain sort of slipperiness to it. So you say love entails sacrifice, 100%. So love entails suffering, 100%. As long as you mean by sacrifice, but with time,
Yeah.
the conflation of suffering and sacrifice entails another cutting off from reality, another cutting off from the root. So you see how there's all these layers upon layers of language cutting you off from the root, if you will, cutting you off from reality. So the first one you say love entails sacrifice, you go, okay. But then so love entails suffering, okay. And then you just say, okay, love entails suffering. And you go, well, wait, in the context of sacrifice, but then suffering and sacrifice get separated,
Mhm.
right? And so that, and then once love and suffering are over here apart from sacrifice, then love equals, then those collapse in on themselves. You see what I'm
Mhm.
saying? So sacrifice and suffering collapse, then love and suffering collapse,
Mhm.
which could happen because love entails sacrifice, but that gets removed. So it's like, I want to say love, suffering, sacrifice. So first these get, and then it collapses in. It's like a black hole, all getting sucked in, and you get sucked in with it.
What is it, just a game of telephone?
Kind of. It's that's you could say, if in
Mm.
a really funny way, you got to philosophize your life because life is a game of telephone.
Mm.
You forget what you forget the origin, like the
Mm.
Heideggerian origin of reality, like
That's why
from which
memory is so huge.
yes, because without memory, you're going to forget where the language started, how the language, and then the collapse of categories occurs. Like the reason why there seems to be such a relationship between language and philosophy is because language is kind of where the collapsing of categories almost always begins.
Absolutely.
It
Yeah.
almost, and once the collapsing of categories begins, you get away from the origin,
Mhm.
like the origin of life itself, and
Mhm.
that's getting to the feminine, the womb, and different things
Yes.
like that. Like
Yes.
there's something about metaphysics that, in a sense, is trying to maintain the womb of reality, like
Mm.
stay in touch with the womb, stay in touch with the birth,
Mm.
and that's the place where
Mm.
thriving and suffering and all these things kind of go
Mhm.
together in the beautiful,
Mhm.
not simply the good. But we tend to lose that connection
Mhm.
because of language,
Mm.
and but the collapsing of language, and that's the key. It's not because language keeps us from the thing, the signifier signified gap, which many people have argued, if words keep us from things. No, that's not the problem. We need words to orient our relationship to phenomenon. The problem is when words collapse into
Mm.
one another, and it's the blurring of language. It's not the divide between the signifier and the signified. That's the problem. It's the blurring of signifiers that then lead to a misorientation of how we carry ourselves in reality, that lead to believing love equals suffering, and therefore we create suffering in order to love. That blurring of signifiers is really, and metaphysics is the resistance of that blurring by keeping the categories distinct.
Yeah, absolutely. I will challenge you a little bit. You said the words won't matter so much. I mean, you said that it's, of course it's related. I do think there's trickle down effects though, because the way that you think about your collapsing of terms on the higher
I
level,
don't disagree, but what I would say is that
like it's just a little bit more straightforward.
I would say you got to philosophize your life, but I also just want to say that you can't every moment of every day be 100% aware of every word you're
Yeah,
saying.
yeah.
You're going to make mistakes in your language, but if you
Mhm.
have a culture and habit of philosophizing your life, you shouldn't have this kind of paranoid. Let me put it this way. Some people can act as if using language will take care if using language well will take care of your problems. I would argue if you don't philosophize your life, you can use language as well as you want and it won't make a difference. Like you've got like it has to be philosophize your life, then language, and you shouldn't get a paranoid relationship with language,
Oh
because I
yeah.
do
Oh
think
yeah.
that leads to kind of paganistic almost thinking that
Sure,
you can kind
sure.
of see in some forms of new ageism.
Yeah, no, no, I just was more so saying, I think that's true, absolutely what you're saying. And that's almost more like the spirit or the energies, this higher level energies of what these words are revealing and
Mhm.
showing versus like you're saying these pagan
Yeah,
little,
like their
spells.
spells or
Yeah.
something.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Even though there is something to the fact
there
that
is something to
to
it.
it, but you don't want to take it too far because then you kind of the very awareness you have of language becomes your down can become a
It
downfall for
becomes
you
that
or it
over
can become a
awareness where the
hang up.
centipede can't move in Nietzsche.
Yeah.
You see what I'm saying?
Yeah. And also, though, really quick, like the why the words matter to your habits is because, for example, if for some reason you don't think that you're allowed to, I don't know, you don't think you think it's like weak to nourish yourself,
Yeah.
then you won't
Then
you
you won't.
won't have proper habits
Yeah.
or
Right.
proper whatever you
Yeah.
decide is proper. But like your habits won't necessarily be toward nourishing yourself because you decided that nourishment is not either attainable for me or is not I'm not allowed to or that's weakness. So that would impact your very basic like
Yeah.
habit
Yeah.
creation.
And
So
it's
it does
top down as
matter.
well.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean,
But I will say that it is much more straightforward if you decide you're like, no, this makes me feel better. This makes me okay.
yeah.
Then you just you know what they to do. It's not a big question mark. Whereas like changing beliefs on certain things, that that's where you have to get into the like take more time to think about. Wait, I have to do this more orbiting work, this kind of non-rational work, because on the base level, it's like just get your body energized, right? Like get yourself, all the things that can help you feel better.
Yeah, well, I wouldn't disagree. What I would say is that why would you think nourishing yourself is weak if it's not from the social? Like,
Mhm.
no animal has experiences the idea of nourishing themselves as weakness. That's just what you do. So if you've come to think
Exactly.
that,
Yeah.
it's from the social down. So
Yeah.
you need to face the social. Like, so that change that's happening
On the baser
on the
level.
individual optimization, like I mean, the irony then is what is being suggested, which is true, is that actually, unless you relinquish, you're
Mhm.
actually not going to individually optimize as much as you think.
Exactly.
Like there are
And actually
actually
that's socially
limits to it.
conditioned too,
Yes.
because then your optimization is to tech bro. I mean,
Yeah.
no
Well,
offense, not to hit
that's
on
a
that guy.
hundred percent what happens.
I'm not
Right.
sure. I know that yeah, but that can be an issue.
Yeah. If you don't go all the way, then the way you did go is much more limited than it could have
Then
been.
you think it is.
Yes, then you think it
you know.
is. That's right. So
Yeah.
actually
Yeah.
going to the place of relinquishment
Mm,
retrospectively opens up new possibilities of individual efficiency.
1000%.
So if let's say you're really all about individual efficiency and all of
Mhm.
that different stuff, then you should go to the relinquishment to open up horizons of
Even further.
possibility even further.
Yeah. And if you're having a problem with the base stuff, look at what you're not relinquishing.
Yeah, that's right. If
You know what
you're
I'm
some
saying? Like
yeah,
they're
yeah,
they're
look at all
referential.
levels of the stack.
Yeah, they're referential
100%.
to each other. That's why it's super
Well,
important to
I'm
see how
glad you
those
said that
relate.
because
Yeah.
part of the problem is like these ways of change are different.
Yeah.
But then also people tend to look at each one of them in
By
isolation.
themselves. Yeah,
Yeah,
they look
when they have to be thought all together. But that
exactly.
weird act again of being able to hold things together but also separately is, I think, a philosophical act. There's philosophical
1000%.
training in it. So that ability to hold difference together
Mhm.
as a whole without blurring them all, which I think is like necessary for the gestalt of being human, that is a kind of philosophical intellectual act because most of the time so you're saying this is better than that or this is that or what order we want to know the order as sequence when really it's a gestalt
Yeah.
where it all has to go together and really
Yeah.
you're trying to
Yeah.
navigate and discern
Mm.
what dimension of the good gestalt to focus on now to unlock the other dimensions of
Mm.
it.
No, that's really good. It reminds me of something great that Seeking Genuine was talking to me about colors and like the blending of colors. It's
Absolutely.
really good. Yeah. So yeah,
Absolutely.
100%.
But I alas we are up,
Yes, we are out of time. But thank
but
you so much for being with us. And
absolutely.
you can see us on
And
ogrose.com. You can go to our Amazon storefront page. You can go to X or to our Spotify, to our YouTube, of course, Instagram.
Instagram,
Yeah.
Instagram. And thank you so much for your
Thank
time.
you for your time. Bye bye.